As World War II neared its dramatic conclusion, countless rumors, mysteries, and strange legends began to swirl around the Nazi German submarines. Hitler and his closest advisors pinned a lot of hope on the German U-boat fleet, and for a time, those submarines lived up to that faith, at least to some extent. They relentlessly stalked Allied ships, striking with brutal force whenever they saw the chance. Hey everyone, welcome! Even in the final days of the war, when it was becoming painfully obvious that Germany was on the verge of defeat, those U-boats were still out there, carrying out all sorts of secret missions, some of them reckless and dangerous, pushing forward with fierce determination. Thanks for joining us here on our channel. If you haven't subscribed yet, we'd love to have you. Go ahead and hit that button. Now let's dive into one of the most desperate and dangerous final maneuvers of this dying beast, worn down but still ferocious. Let's get started. Not Gibraltar, but America? Our story begins in the fall of 1943. At a time when the German U-boat fleet was being reinforced with a brand new class of submarines known as the Type IXC-40. These subs were built in German shipyards between 1942 and 1944. A total of 87 boats of the IXC-40 type were constructed. For a diesel submarine of its day, this model was impressively large, measuring about 251 feet long, 22.5 feet wide, and 31.5 feet deep. Its biggest advantage was its massive fuel capacity, which allowed it to travel an astonishing 13,850 miles without needing to refuel. And it was this incredible range that ultimately sealed the fate of the U-boat. The U-869, which would soon become infamous, departed from Kristiansand, Norway on December 8, 1944, setting out on what would turn out to be its first and only voyage. But when it comes to the path that submarine actually followed, military historians remain deeply divided. Some believe its original mission was to patrol the waters near the Strait of Gibraltar. Others argue that about 3 weeks into its voyage, the U-boat's captain, Lieutenant Commander Helmut Neuerberg, received orders from German Naval Command to shift course and patrol the waters off the New Jersey coast. This theory about a mission off the US coast didn't even surface until the 1990s. Still, it's entirely possible that the U-boat's initial destination really was Gibraltar, and that German command later changed its orders, redirecting it toward New Jersey. In the final chaotic months before the Third Reich collapsed, German military command was in absolute disarray, and all kinds of contradictory orders were being issued. But as research progressed, another theory began gaining traction: that the voyage to America had been the real plan all along, and the Gibraltar route was just a cover. Either way, according to surviving documents from German command, U-869 was officially reported lost somewhere near Gibraltar after February 20, 1945. That conclusion came after all radio contact with the submarine was abruptly cut off on that day. There's also a record stating that on February 28th, American destroyer escort Fowler and the French sub-chaser L'Indiscret launched an attack on a German U-boat in the Gibraltar region. And that's where we hit a strange inconsistency. If U-869 had already disappeared by February 20th, then what exactly was the submarine those Allied ships attacked on the 28th? The records from the American and French vessels don't actually confirm which submarine they hit, and that casts serious doubt on whether any U-boat was even sunk in that incident at all. Still, for decades, credit for sinking U-869 was given to the Fowler and L'Indiscret, and it was widely believed that all 56 crew members had gone down with the sub somewhere off Gibraltar. But we also need to talk about one more man, Herbert Guschowski, the 57th member of the crew. Before the U-boat ever left port in Norway, he came down with pneumonia and was left behind on land, making him the only surviving member of the crew. Then came a dramatic twist in the U-869 story, one that no one saw coming. It happened in 1991. On September 2nd of that year, exactly 46 years after the sub was supposedly sunk near Gibraltar, the wreckage of the U-boat was discovered off the coast of New Jersey. It was found completely by chance by an American diving team led by John Chatterton. According to one account, a fishing net that got snagged on the wreck may have played a key role in helping divers locate the sub. The divers were puzzled, wondering what in the world had gotten tangled in that net. The submarine was resting 253 feet below the surface, just about the deepest you can go without using specialized deep-sea diving suits. In other words, for a scuba diver, going that deep was an extremely dangerous undertaking. According to Wikipedia, there are reports that 3 divers actually lost their lives while exploring the waters where the U-boat was located. When word got out that the wreck might be an old German submarine, U.S. authorities responded with skepticism, and that made the investigation even harder. The official stance was clear. There's no way U-869 could be down there. But here's something remarkable. As early as 1941, the U.S. military already knew that Nazi Germany was preparing for potential combat operations on American soil. In December of that year, several German U-boats secretly crossed the Atlantic, reaching positions where they could have easily attacked the U.S. fleet at any moment. The German Navy, under the codename Operation Drumbeat, was planning strikes on American merchant vessels, which they viewed as soft targets after 2 brutal years of fighting against British forces. In fact, the Nazi submarine U-552, as recalled by its former captain Erich Topp, managed to sink 10 ships along the U.S. East Coast during the single week starting January 13, 1942. Even without any official support from American authorities, the determined trio of divers, John Chatterton, John Yerga, and Richie Kohler, spent nearly 2 years methodically recovering a large number of artifacts, and that work steadily erased all doubt that the submarine had belonged to the Third Reich. The very first relic brought up from the wreck was a piece of the hull marked with the German eagle, the swastika, and the year it was built, 1942. Other discoveries followed, including an oxygen tank stamped with the date April 15, 1944, a knife engraved with the owner's surname, and an aluminum panel from the snorkel mast. That aluminum plate was clearly inscribed with the name of the shipbuilder, De Mag, and the submarine class IXC. Digging into old records, John Chatterton found the name Horenberg on the list of those who died aboard U-869, matching the name carved into the knife. Based on everything they'd uncovered, it seemed almost certain that the knife had belonged to Martin Horenberg, a mechanic who had served aboard the sub. Putting all the evidence together, the divers were now fully convinced that the wreck they had found was, without question, the German submarine U-869, lost in 1945. They had no doubts whatsoever, but that wasn't enough for the official position of the U.S. government. So the tireless divers kept going, determined to bring up even more proof from the wreck. And finally, 6 years after the submarine was first discovered, on August 31, 1997, they succeeded in putting the last lingering doubts to rest. That day, they recovered a wooden box from the motor room of the sub. Inside the box was a plastic plate with bold, unmistakable lettering. It read U-869. Thanks to the intelligence files known as Ultra, we now have a much clearer picture of the route U-869 actually took. Ultra was the name of the Allied system during World War II that successfully intercepted and decrypted German military communications. According to that data, Admiral Karl Donitz, who would later become Hitler's successor, originally ordered the captain of U-869 to head for the US coast and sink Allied ships. A radio message dated December 29th indicated that military operations were scheduled to take place near Philadelphia. Following orders, Lieutenant Commander Neuerberg reported on January 6, 1945, that the U-boat was positioned southeast of Greenland. However, by that time, Donitz had apparently changed his mind and issued a new order to head for Gibraltar instead of the U.S. Maybe the Germans suspected their communications were being intercepted and were trying to mislead the Allies. Or maybe that final order simply never made it to the submarine. Either way, the U-boat continued heading straight toward the American coast. Meanwhile, Allied forces were lying in wait near Gibraltar. On February 22nd, they sank the German submarine U-300, and on February 28th, they reported sinking an unidentified sub off the coast of Morocco. Both the Allies and the German Navy initially identified that sunken submarine as U-869. What really caused the sinking of U-869? When it comes to what actually happened to U-869, the truth is, we still don't know for sure. All we have are theories. The most widely accepted explanation is that the submarine was destroyed by one of its own torpedoes, which looped back in a wide arc and hit the vessel after being misfired. But at the same time, there were also signs of depth charge damage left behind on the U-boat's hull, evidence of an enemy attack. From the very beginning, the divers who discovered the wreck were convinced that the sub had been sunk by one of its own torpedoes. Their conclusion was based on the way the pressure hull was torn apart right at the command center of the boat. In his book, Hitler's U-Boat War, The Hunted, 1942 to 1945, American historian Clay Blair describes several similar cases where torpedoes were accidentally launched and then curved around to strike the very submarine that had fired them. However, the official position of the United States Coast Guard is different. According to their records, U-869 was sunk on February 11, 1945, by depth charges dropped from the escort destroyers Howard D. Crowe and Coiner. And to be fair, the wreck does show the kind of widespread scattered damage that's typically seen in submarines destroyed by depth charges. What's puzzling, though, is whether the sub could have still launched a torpedo after sustaining such catastrophic damage. Or maybe it happened the other way around. Perhaps U-869 was first crippled by its own torpedo, and then, sometime later, the depth charges struck the already sunken wreck on the seafloor. What was U-69's secret mission? The real mystery of the U-boat still remains unsolved. There's a chance, just a chance, that its true mission was to smuggle special agents or saboteurs into America. One clue that hints at this possibility is a piece of paper written in English that was found inside the submarine. And then there's the strange detail about the number of people on board. The official crew roster for this class of submarine lists 4 officers and 44 enlisted men. But U-869 had 56 people on board. So who were those extra 8 men, and what exactly were they doing on that sub? Chances are we'll never truly know the answer. Even so, compared to many other doomed U-boats that vanished without a trace during World War II, U-869 was, in a way, more fortunate. Its final resting place was eventually found, and by the late 1990s, surviving relatives and friends finally had an answer. They knew where the crew had met their end. According to various sources, around 1,000 German submarines were destroyed during World War II. On top of that, another 116 U-boats were either sunk or dismantled after the war as part of the Allied operation known as Deadlight. If you enjoyed this video, it would mean a lot if you gave it a like or shared it on social media. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time, take care and goodbye.